The music shop was surprisingly close. Makes me wonder why I've never seen it. Its windows boasted brand new musical instruments at 70% off. I squinted my eyes at the insane discount. Were they really discounted that much? Or was the sale price ridiculously inflated, then put down to normal price, so it seemed that it was 70% off? Consumerism at its finest. Music mixed with hearty laughter floated out onto the street from inside, and the store instantly felt comforting. As I walked in, I located the source of the laughter. An elderly man sat behind the front counter, talking to a customer. Glasses perched on his nose, and his quaint white moustache moved gently as he spoke. Not wanting to disturb the conversation, I wandered around the store looking at the instruments hung up on the walls. A drum set sat at the end of the store, just under a staircase that led up to a door that said, "Staff only." I walked up to the drum set and gently drummed my fingers against the smaller white drum, frowning when it didn't make the sound I expected it to make. "These are just for display." I jumped as the elderly man suddenly appeared at my side, causing my hand to jerk back and crash into the cymbal and creating a lovely, deafening noise. "Oh my god, I'm so sorry." I reached my hand back out to stop the noise from the cymbal, but knocked the stand over instead. I watched it fall, almost in slow motion, before a hand swooped in and caught it. The elderly man was looking at me from behind the stand, his eyes showing no emotions behind his round glasses. "Sorry," I smiled meekly at the man standing in front of me. "How can I help you?" he asked as he set the stand down in its rightful place. I mentally cursed myself and stuck my hand out for a handshake. "I'm Rose. I own the Restwell Funeral Home down the street." The elderly man shook my hand, but didn't say anything. "You must be, I pulled out the business card that William had given me. "Jacob?" He continued to stare at me for a while, before his mouth opened in a laugh. "What can I, Jacob, do for you?" Jacob held a hand to his chest and smirked at me. I blinked slowly in confusion before answering. "My clients, Mr. and Mrs. Hamilton, have asked for you to play the violin at their daughter's service. They say you're their family friend." The man in front of me cleared his throat and looked down at the ground as he scratched his head. "Yes, they informed me of dear Ainsley. Quite disturbing how the world works, isn't it?" I only nodded in return. "I'm afraid I won't be able to play the violin for the Hamilton service." My eyebrows creased in confusion as I took his words in. "Excuse me?" Jacob lifted his head to look up at me. "It would be very difficult since I don't play the violin." You don't play the violin? Had the Hamiltons made a mistake? Did I walk into the wrong store? Oh, please don't tell me he plays the ukulele instead." "Nope, I don't." The elderly man crossed his arms across his chest. "But you know who does play the violin? My son, Jacob." I did a double take and watched dumbfounded as the elderly man pointed to the name tag on his shirt that said, "Nikolas." My mouth dropped in awe. Why hadn't I noticed his name tag before? "So you're not Jacob?" Nikolas chuckled as he pulled the name tag, still connected to his shirt, to face him and took a long look at it. "Not unless I'm 30 and still living in my parents' basement because I decorated it when I was 15 and now I'm too emotionally attached to leave." I watched in stunned silence as Nikolas set his name tag back in place and readjusted the fabric of his shirt. "Gee, thanks for outing me, Dad." Nikolas and I looked up at the staff door as it swung open and a tall man dressed in a colourful patchwork sweater walked out and stood casually watching our conversation over the railing. "And just for the record, I'm not emotionally attached. I can leave whenever I like. I'm just worried you and Ma would miss me too much when I leave," the man said as he slowly descended the staircase. "Oh, I don't think you need to worry about that." Nikolas turned back to me with a hand to his chest. "My son, Jacob, always the empath." Jacob chuckled as he reached his father's side. "My father, always mordant." Jacob wrapped one arm around his father's shoulder and gripped the other with his hand and shook him slightly, then reached a hand out to me. "Jacob." I shook his hand and marveled at how small mine was compared to his. Almost as if he had heard my thoughts, Jacob chuckled and let go of my hand. The top of the stairs did him no justice. Short, wavy brown hair that he kept pushing out of his face. Brown, almost caramel eyes and a jawline that I could use to cut my awkward self out of this conversation. "I'm Rose. I own the Restwell Funeral Home down the street," I said, as an explanation as to why I was just standing in their shop like a weirdo. "Mr. and Mrs. Hamilton have asked for you to play the violin at their daughter Ainsley's service," I said lowly, unsure of his reaction. Jacob immediately turned to his father in shock. "What? Ainsley?" Nikolas didn't say anything, just lowered his hand and blew out a sigh. "Ainsley's dead? Dad?" Jacob gripped his father's shoulders. No, this isn't real. Matt just told me he took her home from the hospital 2 days ago." He turned back to look at me, and I could see the pain and disbelief in his eyes as he pointed at me. If this is some kind of joke. Jakob pushed his hands into his hair and knelt to the ground. Nikolas knelt down next to him and placed a gentle hand on Jakob's knee. I don't think she would joke about this, Jakob. Jakob clasped his hands in front of his mouth, as if he was praying, as he slowly stood up. I gotta call Matt. Jakob turned and ran back up the stairs, and Nikolas faced me again. I pressed my lips together in discomfort and waited for him to speak. I'm sorry, Rose. You'll have to give us a minute. Matt is Jakob's childhood friend. They grew up together. I'm sure you understand how distressing such news is. I shook my head adamantly and brought my hands up in apology. Of course, I completely understand. I'll leave you two alone. My condolences. Nikolas nodded and gave me a small smile as I turned around and walked out of the shop, swearing at myself inwardly for that royal screw-up. I really hope I don't get an angry phone call from Mr. and Mrs. Hamilton for breaking the news to their childhood friend like that. William's gonna kill me. Far out. I sure know how to screw things up.
5 minutes later.
I stood outside the music shop, carefully leaning against the window that boasted the sale inside. Hesitantly, I looked down at my phone in my hands. Fingers hovered over William's name as I pondered if I should call him or not. To tell of the massive mess I made, or not to tell. Instead of facing his disappointment head on, I decided to send a message instead and deal with the repercussions later. Me. So, I'm at the music shop. Let's just say I made quite the impression on the owners. I let out a sigh and locked my phone with a click, only to hear it ding almost immediately. Hesitantly, I unlocked my phone and closed my eyes in prayer before opening the message app. One new message from William. I pressed the notification and held my breath. William, what did you do? I would have laughed if I didn't know William was being serious. He was really angry. Deciding not to answer him for now, I locked my phone again and slid it into my back pocket as I waited for Nikolas and Jakob to be ready for me to come back in to settle the details. I didn't know how to feel, and I wasn't sure whether Jakob would still play at the funeral, considering his reaction earlier. I really hope I didn't just screw this up for the Hamiltons. I let out a sigh and crossed my arms as I watched the family jaywalk across the street. That's illegal. I jumped in surprise as Jakob suddenly appeared at my side. Oh my god, I exclaimed as I held a hand to my chest. Nope, just me. Jakob cracked a smile as he watched me compose myself. I cleared my throat and stood up straight. So, have you made a decision? I asked tentatively. Jakob's smile disappeared and he ducked his head. I have, he said, as he brought a hand up to his neck. I stood by in trepidation as I watched him fiddle with the hair at the nape of his neck and waited for his response. My dad wants me to, Jakob finally said, as he met my eyes. I let his sentence hang in the air for a while before I spoke. You don't want to? Jakob kept his head ducked for a while, before finally deciding to look up at me. I raised my eyebrows in question as he continued staring at me without talking. He opened and closed his mouth a couple times, as if debating whether he should tell me what he decided or not. Jakob cleared his throat before he continued talking. I don't think I should, honestly. I didn't know how to react to that sentence. Obviously, I understood his standpoint. Being so close to the family, Jakob was bound to have hesitations, but as the owner of the service, I needed him to make the decision that would help our business. I know Matt really wants me to, but I don't think I should. Jakob's head was still ducked, his hair hanging down in front of his eyes, as he told me that. I absolutely understand how you feel. You might want to talk it through with Mr. Hamilton, because he really wanted you to play for Ainsley, I said hesitantly, not knowing if I should push forward or step back and allow the family to deal with the situation. Jakob let out a sigh and finally lifted his head to meet my eyes. He looked torn. I can't do it. I'm sorry. I watched as Jakob stepped away from the sidewalk and turned around, disappearing back into the music shop. I let out a sigh myself. If I couldn't get Jakob to play at Ainsley's service, I wasn't sure what I would do and how William would react. Setting myself down on the bench outside the music shop, I took my phone out and dialed William. He picked up on the second ring. What happened? I hesitated before answering. Jakob's not doing it. There was a rustle on the other side of the phone and the sound of what I guessed was William standing up. What? I pulled the phone away from my ear as William's voice pierced through the speaker. What did you do? I felt fury boil up in my chest. He was blaming me for something that wasn't even my fault and for a situation that was completely out of my hands. The situation was out of my hands. There was nothing I could do to talk him into it. Jakob is a close friend of the Hamiltons and he wasn't comfortable playing at the service. That's totally understandable. I honestly didn't think there was anything else I could have done differently. It didn't feel right putting myself into the family's issues like that. You obviously didn't try hard enough to convince him, William shot back. I felt my mouth drop open in disbelief. William, who are we to say what families can and cannot agree to? At the end of the day, it is our job to ensure that they are comfortable and calm during their last interaction with their loved ones. I was furious. I'm sorry if you feel like I'm wrong for the empathy that I feel towards these families, but Mum and Dad trusted us to make sure the people in our care were treated like family. And I am truly sorry that you don't agree with our dead mother's wishes. The line was silent for a while, before I heard a click and listened as the dial tone rang out in my ear. Wow. I can't believe he would hang up on me like that, especially after he was wrong. I annoyedly locked my phone with a press of the power button and shoved it into my pocket as I made my way back down the street to the funeral home. The whole ordeal had me shaking in fury. I'm the type of person who hates confrontation and absolutely despises putting myself in uncomfortable situations with families where I don't have the right to make decisions for them. The fact that William continuously decides to force me into circumstances where I constantly have to do so makes me furious beyond belief. I huffed in annoyance and shook my head as I awaited the standoff that was ultimately going to happen as soon as I walked into the front door of the funeral home.